My name is Marena Vale, and I need you to feel the urgency pulsing beneath every word I'm about to say. I didn't step away from the coven because I was weak or because the rituals frightened me. Fear was something we were trained to swallow like bitter tea from the moment we were initiated. No, I left because something older than fear began whispering beneath the surface of our spells, something that didn't belong to any season, any moon phase, any sacred lineage we ever claimed to honor. And the worst part is that the others welcomed it. They bowed their heads to it. Some even smiled, but I knew better. December had always carried a certain electricity for witches, a natural hum in the air that made magic easier to shape. Even as a child, I felt it. I remember running my fingers through the frost on the windows of my mother's cottage and feeling it respond, softening, curling, moving like silver breath around my hand. I learned early that winter wasn't cold to us. Not really. It was possibility. But this December, possibility soured into something sharp-edged, something that felt like a hand pressing against the back of my neck, nudging me forward, demanding attention. Magic isn't supposed to feel like command. It's supposed to feel like partnership. But that balance snapped the first week of the month, and I'm still trying to understand what exactly pushed first. I was in the lower grove, our training circle, when it hit me. The others were laughing, weaving small lights between their palms, shaping them into ribbons that spiraled upward before fizzling into the colorless winter sky. And I should have been laughing too. December lessons were usually the most joyful, but that day joy turned heavy. The moment I touched the ground to set the starting sigil for a simple illumination charm, the soil pulsed under my fingertips like a heartbeat. Not mine, not Earth's. Something else, something that shouldn't have been awake. My breath caught in my throat, and I remember glancing around, waiting for someone else to react. No one did. Not a single face shifted. It was as if the pulse singled me out, as if it recognized me. Even after all these years, after all the ways I had tried to cut myself free from the coven's deeper bindings. The ground gave one more deliberate throb before going still, and in that moment I felt an old part of myself rise inside my chest, uncoiling like a shadow remembering daylight. A part I thought I had buried back when I swore I would never again let power consume me the way it almost had when I was 17. I tried to shake it off. Truly, I did. I told myself it was just the December surge, that I was being dramatic, paranoid, overly attuned because of everything I'd tried to leave behind. But the signs built themselves around me like a slow, tightening circle. The lights flickering in the distance when no lanterns were lit. The way the wind blew in patterns instead of currents. The way my own breath sometimes left a faint shimmer, as if the air was responding before my thoughts even formed. Magic was moving faster than intention, faster than consent, faster than caution. That's the moment the fear returned. Not the fear I'd learned to swallow, but a heavier kind that settled in the bones. Because magic outpacing its caster is like a horse running while dragging a rider who's lost the reins. It means someone else is holding them, someone unseen. I remember thinking, if the others feel this too, why aren't they speaking? Why aren't they worried? Why am I the only one who feels like the world is shifting under my feet? But deep down, I already knew the answer. They weren't silent because they didn't feel it. They were silent because they welcomed it. And that was when I realized the coven I once loved was no longer mine or anyone's. It belonged to something else now, something that wanted December for reasons I hadn't yet dared to name. It was in those early December days, when the ground is brittle but the air carries a deceptive softness, that I first sensed the shift. At first it was subtle, a faint distortion in the ordinary rhythm of magic, like a quiet note gone fractionally sharp. Magic has always had a tone to me, a faint hum beneath the world, so familiar that I barely noticed it anymore. But suddenly it was as if someone had tightened every string of the unseen instrument we played with, leaving everything thrumming too loudly, too insistently. I felt it before any ritual, before any spell. Honestly, I felt it before my mind allowed me to admit that something was wrong. The illumination circle we used every winter looked the same as always, simple, etched in spirals that caught the sunlight and reflected it faintly blue. I'd knelt in that circle hundreds of times, but that morning when I placed my palm against the ground to center myself, a shock of heat rippled through the soil like lightning trapped beneath the surface. I yanked my hand back so quickly that one of the apprentices, Keller, asked if a stone had cut me. I lied and said yes. I didn't want to admit the truth. The earth had responded before I even summoned intent. Magic never used to move before command. That was the first sign. Over the next days, small inconsistencies began stacking like quiet warnings. Our ritual candles burned taller than normal, their flames stretching upward in thin, unnatural threads, as though something was pulling from the other side. The air inside the grove sometimes shimmered, faint as a heat mirage, even in the cold mornings when our breaths made foggy ghosts around our mouths. And the whispers, those were the worst of all. Not literal voices, nothing so obvious, just a faint sense of being nudged, of having thoughts that weren't fully mine drift through the edges of my mind like leaves caught in a slow eddy. Ideas of using stronger spells just to test the new currents, or of pushing the boundaries of December magic while the season allowed it. They were easy thoughts to entertain, too easy. The other witches didn't seem troubled. In fact, they seemed almost exhilarated. Practices became louder, bolder. Spells grew brighter, faster, more potent. Even the elders began moving with a strange, restless energy, their eyes sharper, pupils slightly dilated as though they were constantly tracking something beyond human sight. I kept waiting for someone, anyone, to mention the change, to question the intensity. But whenever I opened my mouth to speak, I found the words catching, dissolving, as if the air itself resisted my warning. One evening, while we prepared for a cleansing ritual, I noticed something that sealed the dread settling in my stomach. When we joined hands to begin the first chant, I felt a pulse travel through the circle, not rising from us, but descending into us, as though something above or around us was completing the circuit. It was deliberate, it was strong, and it was absolutely foreign. The others gasped in unison, not in fear, but in delight, smiling as if they'd been waiting for that exact sensation. I stood there, my hand trembling in Keller's, trying to mask the cold sweat forming beneath my gloves. Because while they felt empowerment, I felt possession. While they felt exhilaration, I felt intrusion. The shift wasn't just in magic, it was in them, and in the presence weaving itself quietly, confidently through our rituals. I told myself I needed more proof before speaking, but the truth is, the proof had already begun to speak through the silence of every witch around me. I noticed the change in their approach before anyone else seemed to understand it, like a subtle scent that only the trained nose could detect. It started small, almost innocuous, an offer here, a gift there, all wrapped in warmth and familiarity. Witches have always been patient, cautious, careful to bend the world to their will without drawing attention. We whispered influence like a secret language, nudged luck instead of seizing it outright, and let spells take weeks, sometimes months, to show their effect. But this December, they began cutting through the patience, discarding subtlety, and what they offered was something entirely new: protection. At first it seemed harmless. I saw Keller, barely 15, accepting a small charm from one of the younger initiates. She smiled when it warmed in her hand, telling herself it would keep her safe during the bitter winter nights. Who wouldn't want protection? It's human to crave safety, especially in a world that feels like it's slowly unraveling. But the charm wasn't neutral. It hummed beneath the skin, a tiny pulse that grew in rhythm with her own heartbeat. It didn't just guard, it anchored. And an anchor, I realized, isn't just a shield, it's a tether. I began noticing the pattern everywhere I turned. Someone would offer a shield against misfortune, a small ward for luck, a whispered charm for clarity in dreams, and anyone who accepted it would slowly start to glow faintly, almost imperceptibly, in ways that mapped them to the Coven. I could see it, trace it, even when the recipients themselves remained blissfully unaware. It was clever, brilliant in its simplicity. Instead of asking for allegiance, they were weaving it quietly, gently, into the hearts of those who thought they were safe. I confronted one of the younger witches during a lull in a morning ritual. "Do you understand what you're doing?" I asked, voice steady, even though my insides coiled with alarm. She tilted her head, confused, as if the question were absurd. "I'm helping them," she said, "protecting them from harm. Isn't that what we do?" The words were innocent enough, but I could see the pulse in her palms as she held the charm, weak yet unmistakable. I wanted to shake her, to scream that she was offering more than comfort, that she was quietly handing over pieces of people's freedom. But the lesson I had learned long ago came rushing back. Witches don't respond well to accusations, especially when they don't see the danger themselves. The brilliance of it was terrifying. They didn't need to manipulate, bribe, or threaten. They no longer relied on whispered compacts in the dead of night. They simply offered what people wanted most, a sense of safety, and waited for the invisible chains to form. And once those tethers were in place, the Coven could reach anyone at any distance with nothing more than a thought. The new tactic wasn't subtle, it was invisible, and that made it exponentially more dangerous. I spent days observing, cataloging, tracing every charm, every ward, every soft-spoken offer that floated through the town. The patterns were undeniable. December's chill was no longer the only threat. The warmth of an offered protection had become just as dangerous. And the thought that they were already adapting, learning to perfect it, made my chest tighten in a way I hadn't felt since the night I finally walked away. They were patient, yes, but patience had transformed into something sharper now. They weren't just moving pieces on a board anymore. They were setting the board itself, framing the pieces, and anyone who touched them would be caught before they even realized it. I had seen this evolution, felt its pull, and knew that the familiar rules of safety, the ones I had trusted for years, no longer applied. December has always been a month of power, a time when the air itself seems charged with possibility, when the veil between what is seen and unseen feels thinner. But what I saw this year was not the gentle lifting of that veil. It was a hammering, a pushing, an insistence that the season itself bend to the will of the Coven. Normally, elders caution against overreaching during this month, warning that the pressure beneath the frost can amplify magic beyond control. But now, the rules had changed. They no longer whispered caution. They no longer hesitated. Instead, they were reaching with deliberate force, drawing upon December's surge like it owed them obedience. I watched them in the great hall one evening, the air thick with incense and tension. Candles flickered wildly, their flames bending in ways that defied any natural draught. The high priestess moved among us with a grace that felt almost predatory, tracing sigils in the air with fingers that glimmered faintly blue in the candlelight. Every spell was larger than it should have been, every chant louder, sharper, pulling energy from the room as if she were harvesting the air itself. And the others followed her example, their faces alight not with reverence, but with something raw, hungry. Magic behaved differently this December. I could feel the difference in my bones before I even saw it. Normally, a ritual creates ripples, gentle, predictable, contained. This time, the ripples were crashing waves. Flames leapt higher than intended. Sparks danced along stone walls. Shadows seemed to stretch toward unseen corners. I felt it in the pulse of the floor beneath me, the faint vibration under my feet, as though the earth itself were trembling in anticipation. And yet, the witches seemed to thrive on it, laughing softly as they rode the surge like a dangerous tide, eyes wide, pupils dilated with excitement or something darker that I didn't dare name. It reminded me of the night I nearly lost myself to power years ago when an elder tried to bend a surge beyond its limits. She burned from the inside out, leaving nothing but ash and a window cracked by the force of her final breath. That was supposed to be a lesson carved into the memory of every witch. Power without control destroys everything it touches. But now the entire coven was moving toward the same brink, and this time there was no one left to restrain them. They weren't reckless. They were deliberate. They were aiming for the edge because they had learned or convinced themselves that the edge was within reach. Even the youngest witches were different. I noticed it in their hands as they shaped light and air, in the way their voices rose above mine in unison. Their excitement wasn't naive, it was sharpened, like the thrill of a predator sensing weakness. And the older witches encouraged it, leaning close, murmuring incantations in tongues I hadn't heard since my training. It wasn't just practice, it was orchestration. Every ritual, every chant, every gesture fed into the same current, and that current was rising, gathering momentum, stretching from the grove to the edges of the town itself. I could feel the consequences gathering too, tiny at first, subtle, like tremors beneath frozen ground. A candle flickering in a house where no one lived. A tree bending against the wind with no weather to move it. Shadows stretching at midnight when no moon was in the sky. These were the echoes of a surge they were unleashing intentionally, and I knew with a chill that spread like ice along my spine, that December's magic was no longer a passive season to ride. They were shaping it, weaponizing it, bending its natural rhythm to suit their ambition. Leaving wasn't a single breaking point. It was an accumulation, a slow erosion of the trust I'd once placed in the coven, in the rituals that shaped my childhood, in the voices that had guided me through every lesson of power and restraint. At first, I tried to convince myself that the unease curling inside my chest was simply old fear resurfacing, a remnant of the girl I used to be before I understood the cost of magic. But the signs didn't stop. They multiplied. They deepened. They stared back at me from the eyes of witches I had once called sisters. One of the earliest cracks formed during a twilight gathering, a simple cleansing circle, something meant to soothe the spirit rather than stir it. Yet the moment the high priestess lifted her hands, the air changed. Her voice didn't sound like hers anymore, not entirely. It carried a faint echo beneath it, a layered tone, as if someone or something was speaking in unison with her. I watched her lips, watched the way they shaped the words, but the sound didn't match the rhythm. She moved as though pulled by invisible strings, her gestures a fraction too smooth, too practiced, too synchronized. When the ritual ended, the others were radiant, exhilarated. I was trembling. Then there were the dreams. Witches often dream differently. Our minds tend to wander in places most people never touch. But these dreams were invasive. They arrived metallic, sharp-edged, like tasting blood on the tongue. I would wake with the impression of symbols burned behind my eyelids, sigils I didn't recognize, and whispers curling around my thoughts long after dawn. Worse, I began to sense that the dreams weren't mine alone. During meals, during training, I would catch a younger witch pressing her fingers to her temples, eyes distant, as if trying to shake off the same intrusive visions. But whenever I approached, she would blink, smile too quickly, and insist she was fine. And then came the scorch marks. Ritual circles had always been clean, precise, respectful. But in those December nights, every one of them ended in blackened stone or charred earth, even when we used no fire. The marks looked like clawed fingers dragging across the ground, or fractures splitting the surface. The elders dismissed it as ambient power, a natural consequence of the December surge. But no natural surge leaves scars that pulse faintly hours after a ritual ends. I could feel those marks beneath my boots, warm and restless, as if something had tried to surface and nearly succeeded. The final moment, the one that tore away whatever loyalty I had left, came when the high priestess herself approached me, her gaze calm and hollow. She asked me to anchor the surge during the next major ritual. Me, the one who had always been steady, yes, but also the one who questioned, who hesitated, who had begun to sense the wrongness threading through every spell. The high priestess placed her hand on my shoulder and said, "You, Marena, are the missing piece." There was no warmth in her touch. Her palm felt like a seal being pressed against wax, and underneath her voice, I heard it again, that second tone, almost imperceptible, an echo that made my skin crawl. I tried to stall, to gather my thoughts, but she leaned closer and whispered, "You can feel it calling to you too. Don't deny it." That was the moment the truth finally snapped into clarity. They weren't resisting the presence infiltrating our magic. They were inviting it, embracing it, feeding it, and they wanted me to help anchor it in place. I left that same night, not with dignity, not with ceremony, just with urgency. I ran, my boots slipping on frost, my breath ragged in the cold air, the sigils behind me still glowing faintly as though watching me go. And as I crossed the boundary of the grove, I felt it, something in the darkness shifting, stirring, trailing me, as if curious why one of its chosen pieces was fleeing the board. Once I had left the grove, once the circle of fire and incense was nothing but a memory behind me, I began to see the threads they were weaving in the world beyond their walls. They had always worked quietly, shaping currents without notice, nudging fate like a careful sculptor. But now the tactics were different. They were visible, yet disguised so cleverly that most people would never recognize them for what they were. And because of the shift, I knew that anyone could already be caught, tethered without realizing it. I learned quickly to watch for signs, the subtle markers that whispered, "You are noticed, you are mapped, you are counted." The first sign is always in the wind. You might not see anything, you might even think it's the ordinary chill of December, but pay attention. If the wind carries a certain insistence, if it curls around your hands, your face, your clothes, moving in patterns that shouldn't exist, it's more than weather, it's attention, it's probing. I felt it brushing against me in the empty streets, guiding me, testing boundaries, measuring reactions. Ordinary people would call it a draft, an early frost, a trick of perception. But I know better. That wind carries the pulse of the Coven. Shadows are another warning. December nights are long and shadows stretch naturally, but what you need to feel is the unnatural extension, the fraction too long, the hesitation in a movement that should be seamless. I've caught glimpses of them on walls where no one stands, slithering along the corners of rooms, flickering at the edge of vision like a heartbeat out of sync with your own. And if a shadow lingers too long, if it seems almost curious, almost aware, you have to remember, where light bends unnaturally, intention follows. Then there are the people who offer themselves too freely. Witches have learned to dress their power in the guise of kindness, of generosity, of protection. A neighbor bringing a charm for warmth, a stranger insisting they just want to help, an acquaintance slipping something into your hand with a smile that doesn't quite reach their eyes. These are the tethers forming. The warmth in your palm is not comfort. It is connection, a map, a small anchor linking you to something you cannot see. Once it touches you, it lingers. And the moment you trust it, the moment you welcome it, it begins to claim space inside your life that you won't notice until it's too late. Even the small things, the sudden calm in a storm, the odd flicker of light in a window when no one is there, the sensation of being watched when you are certain you're alone, are all part of the web they are spinning. December gives them strength, yes, but it also gives you clues if you can see them. I've begun cataloging them, noting patterns, tracking how subtle acts build towards something larger. It's exhausting, but necessary. And the most dangerous sign of all is internal, a quiet tug in your mind, thoughts that feel slightly borrowed, impulses that don't quite belong to you. I felt it on myself the moment I realized the dangers of their charms, the surge of December power. They test you first through suggestion, through the tiniest of nudges. Once that seed is planted, once the tether begins, resistance becomes far harder than recognition. That is what the witches have perfected, making people believe they are safe while quietly mapping, marking, and binding them to a system of control that is invisible until it's already complete. I need you to understand something that cannot be brushed away like a casual winter chill. I am speaking from the edge of something that has no mercy. I am speaking because I have seen the pulse beneath the frost, the rhythm in the air that signals their reach, and the way they are moving now is unlike anything I have ever known. I have left the Coven, yes, but I carry the memory of every tether, every charm, every whispered promise of safety that conceals chains. I carry it in my chest like a second heartbeat, one that never sleeps, one that warns me constantly that December is no longer just a season. It is a weapon, and it is aimed at everyone who does not see, who does not know, who does not fight. You might think that leaving was enough, that distance could shield me, but you would be wrong. Their eyes, their reach, their influence does not respect walls, doors, or miles. They track patterns, feel pulses, watch the smallest movements, and I have already sensed them searching through the streets, through homes, through lives, looking for cracks, weaknesses, openings, and they will find them if you do not. They are not subtle in their intent anymore. They are strategic, patient, ruthless. This is not about spells that fade at sunrise, not about charms that warm the hand and then vanish. This is about tethering, mapping, claiming, and it is silent, it is invisible, and it will appear as something you desire most. Protection, safety, guidance, warmth, a hand to hold when the world is cold. That is their brilliance and their danger. They no longer ask for consent. They disguise control as care, allegiance as kindness, chains as comfort. I have walked among them and watched the young ones accept these offerings with the softest smiles, thinking themselves safe, thinking themselves clever, thinking themselves untouchable. I have felt the pulse of their tethers as they reached, thin, fragile at first, then strong, then relentless. I have traced them to the edges of the world as they move outward, waiting for the perfect moment to weave them tighter, to close the circle. And I know, with a clarity that cuts through the cold air like a knife, that there are those who will never see it coming until it is too late. You must understand that the danger is not in some distant place, not in dark forests or hidden groves. It is here, now, in the streets you walk, in the hands you shake, in the warmth that is offered without question. It is in every flicker of light where it should not be, every shadow that lingers too long, every thought that feels borrowed, every sudden surge of calm or comfort that seems to arrive unbidden. They are everywhere and nowhere. They have shifted tactics, and the world will not recognize them until the first tether has anchored the unwary. So listen carefully. Do not accept warmth without suspicion. Do not trust protection that appears in your hand like a gift. Watch the wind, study the shadows, measure every impulse that doesn't feel entirely yours. December amplifies everything, yes, but it also magnifies their reach, their ambition, their hunger. They are patient, but patience has become their weapon. They do not hesitate. They do not doubt, and they are already mapping, marking, binding, using every pulse of magic that December offers to extend their control. I am leaving warnings in echoes, in words, in the tremor of my voice that carries through frost and shadow. I am leaving instructions in the patterns I trace, in the signs that I record, in the knowledge that what they have begun this year will not be undone by fear alone. You cannot hide from them. You cannot outpace them. You can only see them, only feel the tethers forming, only recognize the signals before they anchor you. And once you see, you must act. You must remember every pulse, every flicker, every unnatural warmth. You must watch, you must measure, you must resist. December is here. The surge is rising. The tethers are forming. And whether you realize it or not, the choice is already pressing against your chest, waiting for your recognition. How will you respond? How will you protect yourself when the hand that offers warmth is the same hand that binds? How will you see the markers in the wind, in the shadows, in the quiet suggestions that brush against your thoughts like invisible fingers? The answers are not mine to give. They are yours to find. And in this moment, as the frost deepens and the pulse grows, I leave it to you to decide what you will do next.